All right, well, we're proud to have Steve Chatman, at Rising Above Ministries with us today. A ministry that has helped this community, so much over the last several years, and it's grown and grown to help a very vulnerable population group, special needs families, special needs adults, special needs children. And so, without further ado, I've introduced our guest today, Steve. I think this to start here is introduce the mission statement and the mission set of Rising Above, what you all do, because a lot of viewers know you, and a lot of our viewers are similar and have heard of Rising Above, but many people have not. And so we want to get the word out. And so go ahead and tell us a little bit more about Rising Above.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, of course. And yeah, so Rising Above Ministries we're coming up on about 20 years of ministry now. Jeff and Becky Davidson started this. Jeff and Becky have a son with profound special needs. Mm-hmm. And so it really started out of their own experience of just seeing that a lot of times families impacted by disabilities and special needs live in the shadows. And some of them, you see them, but you don't even realize that they're impacted by disabilities. There's a lot of hidden disabilities. And so they just saw that these families need somebody to champion them, somebody to oftentimes just to speak into their lives and say, hey, we see you. And so that's a big part of Rising Above's ministry and mission, is just to bring hope and encouragement to these families that oftentimes are lonely, are overwhelmed, are frustrated, feel left out. And so we just want to simply speak into their lives and say, hey, we see you. We know that it's overwhelming. We know that it's hard. And obviously, of course, remind them too that God sees them and God cares deeply about them. And so we're a support ministry. And advocacy and championing these families for sure.
Largely, again, being an advocate, being their champion, and then importantly, I think what you're getting is providing that community, which is a large part of what you do there at Rising Above too. Mm-hmm. And just to reiterate, this is a faith-based Christian ministry, and it was born really out of the church. And I'm so sorry again, Becky's husband, Jeff, when he was living, was a member at the River Community Church, mm-hmm. and started to issue spot there that, wow, it was a personal thing. We've got a child here with pretty, significant disability. There's not a community, and people are getting left behind, right? I mean, I've heard this story so many times, and it makes me just emotional thinking about it. But did he found the organization prior to his death, or did Becky take the torch afterwards?
Yeah, so Jeff was a salesman. He was an insurance salesman, and he was extremely
phenomenal. Charismatic.
Yes, and he was great at it. And then Jeff and I actually served on staff at the River for several years. Jeff was our executive pastor. I was the family pastor. And so we both were special needs dads. Yeah. So we were able, we had a seat at the highest level tables in leadership. Yep. So we were able to advocate, hey, we need to do something for these families. And so we started a special needs ministry at the River and got that going. And Jeff and Becky were beginning to do some things with Rising Above, just as volunteer, non-official thing, but begin to see the need for ministry. And so while he was on staff at the River, they made the decision, we need to go full time with this and take another big step of faith in resigning the church and just going full time into this ministry. And so they did that, and God just blessed, and again, just started seeing the population. This is a large population. Globally, about 20% of individuals are impacted by disabilities. In the Upper Cumberland, I talked to special education directors, and I always ask them, hey, how many students have an IEP, which means an individual education plan? They've got some type of disability. Mm-hmm. Across the board, whether it's large counties like Putnam County, small counties like Jackson County, it's about 1/5 of the student population has an IEP. So you're looking at a lot of families in the Upper Cumberland that are impacted by disabilities.
Just to be clear, there are 20% of students have an IEP.
Yeah, pretty much across the board in the Upper Cumberland.
Across all public schools in this region.
In public school system. Yeah. When I ask them that, their response is usually about a fifth. About a fifth of our students.
And that's not taking into account a lot of the families with maybe some level of autism and things that are not taking action.
Absolutely.
And going back to, to the ministry aspect from our churches, I grew up in a church, just like you did. And where were these people? Yeah. I think back to my childhood, and there were, a few families there with their special needs, children. I could think of some of these beautiful families now, but largely, invisible, right?
Yes.
And so I think that what God has done with that ministry is nothing short of, His hand is being present there with what they've done. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, you've got two children with Down syndromes. Is that correct, Steve?
Yep.
How can you speak to how that, again, you were there with the seat at the table, as a pastor there at the River, but how that's impacted you as a dad, and how you've seen that in your own marriage, in your own family, and how that allows you to perform at Rising Above.
Yeah. Well, I think it's definitely fine-tuned who I am. I have always had a heart for the underdog, so to speak. I've always, a lot of times I was the underdog. I was the new student. We moved quite a bit. So the new student walking into the cafeteria for the first time, you're like, I don't know anybody. So my heart is always drawn at a dinner party, at an event, to that person standing off by themselves that just doesn't seem to fit, to just want to go and connect. So that's always been my heart. And so then with having children with special needs, suddenly your eyes are open to this population out here who are largely forgotten, largely unseen. Yeah. And so it just reminds me of the challenges that they face. And I always tell people, if you know one special needs family, you know one special needs family, because they are so different, and the disabilities and how they impact their livelihoods. But so many of the things that they do have in common is a lot of times they are not seen in our communities, and they feel very isolated and lonely. So I love to be able to tell people what I do now full time with Rising Above Ministries. I'm not a professional. I'm a practitioner. I live this special needs life day after day. Becky Davidson, she and Jeff, that they started this out of their own experiences. And then, of course, Jeff passed away about 5 years ago, and Becky just stepped up and continued the leadership. I mean, so now she is a widow, single mom, raising an adult son with profound disability. So we are practitioners. So oftentimes when we speak, it isn't necessarily out of professional, it's out of just our daily, we live this, and we understand the in and outs and the challenges that come with it. So it's profoundly impacted me. I mean, and it's, like I say, it's enhanced what was already there, and helped me to see and apply that to this whole other population out there that is desperate for someone to come alongside and say, hey, I see you over there. I know it's hard.
Yeah, and with that being said, for those families that that are plugged in and listening to this, and I know that Rising Above does so many things now, global, right? Actually, a global organization. But here in the Upper Cumberland Plateau, what are some of the initiatives and things that that you're involved in and executing, but also that families can come to plug into this community?
Yeah, so we do a lot of things, and I would say a couple of recent things that we've been a part of that I'm pretty excited about is we just recently did a video series for married couples. When I was at the River on staff and the family pastor, I did a lot of marriage ministry stuff. Yep. So there's a lot of great resources out there. There's not a lot of resources for married couples who are raising children with disabilities.
And that's because a lot of times the education, which I went through the Reengage recently over at the River, and great, but again, more on how can we make our marriage better between husband and spouse, and largely a lot of the material is not on how do children impact a marriage, and especially children with disabilities.
And it does. And here's the thing, though, and if you get on the internet and you say Google, marriages impacted by disabilities, you'll start hearing statistics like, 80-90% of these marriages end in divorce. Well, that's not true. There's actually no sound research to support that. Some studies actually show just the opposite. Actually, couples who are raising children with Down syndrome actually have a lower divorce rate than the national average. So there's a lot of misinformation there. But does a child with disabilities profoundly impact your marriage? Absolutely it does. Yeah. Absolutely. But a lot of these couples and these people are incredibly strong individuals. But we decided that there needs to be more resources that can speak to some of the specific challenges. So in our video series, we bring in real couples who are raising children with disabilities, and they share their stories. And then we brought in, we have some experts, who speak into that. And so we created it's a 5-session video series. It's on our website. It's called Starting Lineup. We kind of use this basketball theme to make it fun. So that was something that we did. Another aspect of these families are the neurotypical siblings, the siblings without special needs or disabilities, oftentimes called shadow siblings, because sometimes just the sheer volume that their disabled sibling requires as far as care and attention, they sometimes feel forgotten. So we created a video for these kids called the Sib Show. And it's a fun, interactive, they can play along with the games we do. But all throughout this video is we're just speaking encouragement to those kids, talking to some of the challenges and some of the thoughts they wrestle with. So those are just some of the type of resources that we produce on a regular basis, just to say, hey, this stuff is here. Becky just did a series for moms called Even If, and just looking at, even if the worst happens, God still sees you. And here's a woman who's walked that out. She lost her husband.
She's had the even if scenario.
Yes. And so it's to be able to make those kind of resources a reality and make them available to families. And in the Upper Cumberland and literally around the world, you can access these things anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's pretty exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah. So, so again, thanks for marriage, the actual typical siblings, which are probably largely also that's been ignored, on giving them tools and resources and making them go through those thoughts and interact and really strengthen those bonds. I know that you lead a group just with dads, weekly, just providing that ongoing continuity and support and bringing in friendship. We're so isolated in the modern era. Without having something on your calendar that brings you into that community, just like you would go to church on Sunday, it's really easy for those bonds to deteriorate. So can you tell me a little bit more about it? Are there any other groups that Becky leads or that you lead, on a regular basis?
Yeah. So community is huge because, you talk about church, and a lot of people will find community in their local church.
Yep.
Sadly, a large majority of families impacted by disabilities are unchurched. And that's a message I try to help pastors understand. If you want to reach unchurched people, you need to look at families impacted by disabilities. Lifeway Research recently did a survey of churches, pastors and churches, and 90%, they asked them a simple question: if a family with disabilities came to your church, would they feel welcome? 90% of the pastors and the church body said yes, because their heart truly is yes.
Sure.
But according to the Department of Disabilities and Aging in Tennessee, 87% of our churches have no disability ministry. So while we may want them to feel welcome, the reality is they wouldn't, because we haven't done anything to accommodate. Now, and sometimes we think, and it's so much more than just a wheelchair ramp. Sometimes we think, well, we got a wheelchair ramp, we got an elevator so they can get in. But what happens once they're in there? What about the family with an adult child with autism who has a hidden disability? How are they going to participate? How are you going to handle, those kind of scenarios? So we want to try to help them with those things and figure that out. But yeah, so I mean, we're doing a lot of things. We're trying to help that community be seen. I do a monthly gathering for dads called Dad's Hang Time. And just getting dads together. We do an annual retreat in the fall, and we had dads come from all over the country. We had a dad come from South Dakota last year. And just getting dads together. Becky leads some community groups. She does a monthly luncheon for moms. She does the online community groups. COVID hit and really kind of changed a lot of things, but it really opened up doors for us to go online. And now we do Zoom groups, community groups that meet once a week. So people around the country, literally around the world. We have a mom in Sweden that is a part of one of our online community groups every week.
Yeah.
And so they're just looking for connection and to connect with other people who understand what you're walking through. That's the thing with dads. Dads are very lonely. We're not as good as our wives at expressing that.
Yeah.
But if you get a group of dads together, and it's real simple, you get a group of dads together, you feed them some food.
Yeah.
Throw out a little question or two, man, they'll open up, because they are hungry for that community, for that friendship, and really a safe place to unpack some of those hard feelings and things that you go through that maybe your peers at work wouldn't quite understand,
or even in your life group at church. Okay, where else are you going to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, that is great, and it reminds me of that verse about faith without works is dead. As we get, and there's so much rightfully to be said about grace and faith, and sure. But we've got to take action. We were talking a little bit before we went live today about, about some of the explosive growth with some specific churches in town, and also about the erosion of attendance and decay and death of certain churches.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the special needs ministry. Look what it's done with certain congregations, like at the River. There's a volunteer ministry where you can sit with special needs families. There's separate services. I know you've been a part of making sure that other churches, that we are going live and taking action to make sure that we're reaching these people, just like y'all are doing full time, outside of Sunday. So I just think that's awesome. Again, you have been in ministry for most of your adult life. You were, a pastor and senior leader at the River Church, for 2 decades before serving as a leader in this ministry. What do you think have been the greatest rewards and also challenges, facing the ministries that you've been a part of?
Yeah, well, 30 years,
that's a lot.
I've seen a lot of things, a lot of disappointments. I think probably one of the biggest challenges is when you feel like you don't have an answer for someone. And you've studied, you've gone to school, you've prayed, you've read your Bible, you've been, and obviously God is our greatest resource, but life is hard, and people find themselves in very, very hard places, whether it's their marriage, maybe they've got a diagnosis and now they're realizing, oh my goodness, we're going to be a special needs family. Our life is going to look very different than we thought.
Yeah.
Whatever the scenario, the loss of a loved one. And I think over the years of just not having that magic wand, or being able to write a prescription, or being able to say, hey, here's a great book, read this, and it's all going to be better.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot more complex than that. And so that's a lot of times been the challenge. Growing up, as a kid, we watched a show called Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
And the little community doctor, Doc Baker, and there were so many times, he's just a country doctor, and of course they didn't have the resources and stuff back then, but so many times he would just leave a house and say, I feel so inadequate because I've done everything I can do. And sometimes in ministry it's like that. And so what you realize is I can't fix your problem, but you know what I can do? I can walk alongside you. I can bring you a glass of cold water. I can sit with you. I mean, I sat with a wife and her adult daughter as the neurosurgeon came out on Christmas Eve and said, he'd had a massive heart attack. He had stopped for a while, and they're like, there's just no brain activity. I mean, those are hard spaces, and I couldn't change any of that.
There's not a prescription.
Right. But I could sit with them, and I sat with them. And then I ended up preaching the funeral and just loving on them. But those are some of the hard ones when I can't fix it, But the rewards then are, when we can help a family find hope, a family that's been struggling, a marriage that's been dysfunctional, and we can say, hey, there are some things to help. There are some things you can do. And so just being able to see people have hope, maybe someone smile for the first time, see a couple who thought they had no option but divorce, actually turn it around. And because you were able to help them, you were able to walk with them, and maybe push them sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I've chased husbands down steps before and said, you got to get back in here,
Yeah.
I mean, just those are rewarding things.
Yeah.
So it's, I'll tell you what, in ministry, it's a combination of joys and sorrows, and they coexist.
Yeah.
They coexist. You don't live in the absence of one or the other. They're both there, and you got to learn to take care of yourself as well, because it impacts you. But to walk in that and to find that there's health in that for sure. So so those are so that balance of the challenges and the joys.
Well, those are really wise words. And I was going to ask, what is your biggest just advice in general, whether this is in ministry or just, any leaders out there in the business community or anywhere? What would you really advise to people that are being placed in positions of leadership for the first time? I think one of the things that you just said is like, you got to have grit and you've got to fight. And, there's going to be ups and downs definitely in ministry, and part of the sorrow in those moments are part of it, and they make the good times even better. But what else do you have? Is there any just general advice that you have for maybe a young person that's coming out of seminary, for instance? A young a young pastor, for instance, I mean, you can speak to ministry there, but like, what would be the advice that you would give?
Yeah. Well, I always think about when I was in college, my roommate and I went down to South Carolina, outside of Charleston. There was a hurricane that had come through that fall. And so we went down over Christmas break to do some, we were working with a roofing crew and getting a roof back on people's houses that just try to get it in the dry.
Yep.
So we got assigned to this contractor, this guy who did this for a living. I was very successful at it. And so we were working with him, and we had done a little bit of that. And I remember we were working on this one roof. It was just a little shack, honestly. It was a little low, this was a very poor, low income area. And we were working on this roof, and we kind of got to noticing, and we've been up there for a good while, and we had kind of done something a little bit off. And we were looking at it, we're like, oh, wait a minute, this is off. And I never forget his response. We said, hey, we called him over. He's the expert. He's the guy, Said, look, we kind of got this off here. And he looked at it and he said, well, you know what, boys? He said, you can't see that from my house. Let's just keep going. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I can't see it at my house, so I'm not going to worry about it. And that everything in me was like, I don't think that's right. I mean, I thought, man, if this was like a $1 million home that you were getting paid, I bet you would probably
not do
fix that.
Sure.
And so the point I'm making with that is I always say, no matter what it is, the Bible in the New Testament talks about whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do it right. And so I just say, whether you're the senior pastor, whether you're the CEO, or you're the guy that takes the trash out. And I've done all of that. Yeah. And I still do. I mean, it's like you do it right and do it well. And that's what I just always encourage, because I believe, because that was my dad modeled that. I always tell people my dad was not highly successful in the world's eyes as far as a great estate that he left when he passed.
Yep.
But it was his legacy of he did the right thing. Sometimes even if it was not to his advantage or it cost him, he did the right thing. And so I just always tell, especially young guys, but really anybody, you can't go wrong. You do the right thing. Whatever, again, whether you're the leader or you feel like you're on the bottom rung, you do the right thing. And I haven't always done that. I've made mistakes, but that's always just tried to be like, whether it's whether I'm getting paid or whether this is part of my job description or not, just do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think you can't go wrong with that.
Integrity. We try to keep that as one of our core values, and it's easier said than done. And if everybody did their part and did that, look at the changes that can come. Well, thank you so much for coming out, Steve. This has been a really great conversation. It's going to have some great content that I think the community is really going to enjoy. For everyone that's watching, Steve Chatman can be contacted directly through Rising Above Ministries. You can find their website online. Him and Becky Davidson are doing a great job. Thank you for everything that you've done as a leader in the church and in the community. You're inspiring everybody to take action and not hide away and be silent. So thank you so much.
Hey, Tyler, thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
Good.